Did you know there are now over 2 million podcasts in the Apple Podcast directory, but of them, more than a quarter, 26%, have published only one episode, which really puts into perspective the fact that this is the 150th episode of Your Brain on Facts. I am thrilled to be here and doubly thrilled that you are here too. There's a little bit of backstory to this special episode, kind of. I was going to try for a Guinness World Record for most podcast guest segments in a single episode. But not only did I fail to get the number of guest spots that I had wanted through no one's fault but my own and my own poor email management skills, Guinness never got back to me. I gave it 12-13 weeks as they suggested, even, pushing back the show schedule. Never heard a thing from them. That being said, let's kick this off with fact number 1 about the Guinness World Record. It only costs $5 to apply for a Guinness World Record, but if you want an official adjudicator with a stopwatch and a clipboard to come watch you do it, that'll run $10,000. An adult queen bee's body can be 25% ovary by weight. Until 1670, people thought that hive life revolved around a king bee. A shocking assumption, I know. Until one was examined under a microscope, and the biologist was surprised by the size of the king's ovaries. Skylight, Charlie Seesaw, Half Moon, Regretful Climb, Silence Mill, and Patriotic Shortener aren't racehorses. They were nicknames for the guillotine.
Hello, fellow Brainiacs. I'm Dan Pugh.
And I'm Shauna Harrison. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, Elvis has left the building is used to express the finality of a situation when a person has died or made a dramatic or notable exit.
As early as 1956, the phrase was commonly used as a public announcement at the end of singer Elvis Presley's concerts to inform the fans there was no possibility of his performing another encore, so it was a literal usage.
The phrase's earliest figurative use was an allusion to Elvis's death on August 16, 1977.
My favorite is to use it when a tense argument has just ended and both of the people in it storm off, and then me and the other bystanders are all like, oh, that was really weird.
Yeah, that could really lighten the mood.
Exactly.
Join us on a whimsical adventure of idioms and other turns of phrase on Bunny Trails, a Word History podcast.
The groundbreaking movie Akira was the most expensive anime when it was created in 1988, costing 700 million yen, or about $6.3 million, 5.3 million euros. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $14 million today. Since 2001, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has maintained a flock of 1 million chickens to produce the eggs required to make enough flu vaccine to immunize the entire U.S. population if need be. Unfortunately, eggs can't be used to produce the COVID vaccine. Built-in obsolescence is when a product is designed to have a finite usable life. Dynamic obsolescence is bringing out new models so that people won't want to keep their old ones.
Hi, I'm Tyler Mendelson from Dank Ferrick, a Star Wars podcast. Did you know NSYNC had a cameo appearance in Star Wars Episode 2 Attack of the Clones at the behest of George Lucas's daughters? Justin Timberlake and Lance Bass were not present for the 2-scene shot with the band, but they ended up getting cut from the final film regardless. Check out Dank Ferrick, a Star Wars podcast, on Spotify and YouTube.
Singapore's Land Transport Authority reported in 2017 that 12% of Singapore's total land area was already taken up with roads. If that were the U.S., that would be almost 2 Texases of road surface. Fairy flies, a 1,400-member-strong subset of wasps, are so tiny that some don't even have a heart. Males of the smallest species are only 0.7 millimeters long when fully grown. The entire global supply of gold ever mined would fill 3.3 Olympic swimming pools. That nearly arbitrary unit of measure, by the way, is 660,000 gallons or 2.5 million liters. 11% of the world's gold, or 72,000 gallons, 275,000 liters, is in the form of the jewelry of Indian women.
Hey everyone, Christine from Footnoting History here. I'd like to wish Moxie a happy 150th episode. Here's a fast fact for those of you who enjoy political history. William Morris Hughes, who was the 7th Prime Minister of Australia, took part in the founding of no less than 3 political parties, but he got expelled from all of them. Now you know.
Pakistan is an acronym for Punjab, Afghania, Kashmir, Sindh, Baluchistan. Ever wonder why so many places have Stan in their name? It just means place of. Legendary Native American athlete Jim Thorpe had his shoes stolen before he was meant to compete in the 1912 Olympic Games in Stockholm. He ended up digging through the trash until he found 2 shoes, which did not match, to run in, and won the gold medal. How much bigger is 1 billion than 1 million? A million seconds is about 2 weeks. A billion seconds is 32 years.
This is Mignon Fogarty from the Grammar Girl podcast, and here's a quick fact. When you're trying to figure out whether to use the word a or an, it's the first sound of the next word that makes the difference, not the first letter.
The furthest you can be from land on Earth is a spot in the ocean between New Zealand and Chile, 1,700 miles from the nearest coast. It's called Point Nemo, or the oceanic pole of inaccessibility. A ship at Point Nemo could be closer to the International Space Station than to dry land. In the U.S. alone, domestic cats are responsible for the death of 22 billion small animals annually. The most dangerous plastic surgery procedure is the Brazilian butt lift, where fat is taken from other body parts and injected around the glutes. 1 in 3,000 patients will die from fat getting into blood vessels and going to the brain, heart, or lungs.
Hey all there, Brainiacs, it's Drew from the Real Feels podcast, and I have a bit of movie facts just for you. So we all love the Chiodo brothers and their work in creating the Krites from Critters, Large Marge from Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and who can forget the 80s cult classic Killer Clowns from Outer Space. But did you know that it was just 3 years later that the Chiodo brothers repurposed some of the molds for the Killer Clowns from Outer Space in order to create that ooey, gooey, nightmarish fuel for children all throughout the 90s? That's right, I'm talking the trolls from Ernest Scared Stupid. Because let's face it, who could not forget Trantor, the main troll, the ugly guy with the goop running down his nose and stealing children and turning them into little wooden dolls? Weren't you terrified as a kid? I know I was, and I loved every moment of it. Know what I mean?
The oldest building in the world that you can visit as a tourist is the funerary complex in the ancient Egyptian city of Saqqara. This sprawling necropolis also contains the oldest pyramid, built in 2630 BCE. One reason skirts and dresses started to shorten toward the end of the Victorian age was the sheer volume of horse manure in the streets of London. 50,000 horses could work in the city, with each horse producing 15 to 35 pounds or 7 to 15 kilos of manure every day. The most effective hunter in the world is the dragonfly. They don't chase their prey, they intercept them, and catch more than 94% of what they're hunting for. They're so agile in the air because they can control each of their 4 wings independently.
Hi, this is Rebecca Sebastian of Die-alougue podcast and Yellow Tape, a true crime trivia show. Charles Manson was a cult leader. We all know that. But did you know he was also a musician who had achieved moderate success? That's right. Manson was buddies with Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys, and he wrote a song for the band that debuted on their 1969 album 2020. It was called Never Learn Not to Love. It was indeed Manson's song, only it had been softened from his decidedly darker version, which had harsh lyrics and a more ominous title, Cease to Exist. Of course, later that year, Manson would get the fame he was seeking through much more violent means. This song predates his cult's killing spree by mere months.
Dolly Parton's husband of 57 years doesn't like country music and only goes to her gigs when she's playing a state fair because he likes the tractor pull. Shark teeth are actually scales. Every year, sharks kill globally the same number of people in Britain killed by livestock. The Emancipation Proclamation didn't free all enslaved people in the United States, only those in the Confederate States. There were still people enslaved in Union states, particularly where slavery was used as a legal punishment.
Hi, this is Dave Keeshan of Gurus of Comedy, and here's my fun fact. The earliest written example of comedy surviving today were produced by Aristophanes around 400 BCE. One play was famous as a satire that mocked celebrity at the time, Socrates. Some of the accusations in the play were used as evidence in a trial against Socrates 20 years later, where he was accused of corrupting the minds of the youth of Athens. Socrates lost that trial and was sentenced to death.
Estelle Getty, who played Sophia on The Golden Girls, was 1 year younger than Bea Arthur, who played her daughter Dorothy, so big props to makeup and costuming for that one. She also had the least acting experience of the four, and initially lived in constant fear that someone would realize she was no good and fire her. There are so many species of insects that we know of that if you made an Insect of the Month calendar, you could go 80,000 years before you had to repeat an insect. In 2003, a U.S. submarine came under attack from a polar bear. The USS Connecticut had partially surfaced when the bear spotted it. After 40 minutes of gnawing on the exposed rudder, the bear lost interest and the brutal war was over. If you ever feel lonely or isolated, think about this. A cubic meter of air has about 100,000 different living organisms in it. A cubic meter of soil has 10 billion.
Hey there, Your Brain on Facts listeners. My name is Ryan, and I'm the co-host of Lexitecture, an etymology podcast all about word origins and histories. Congratulations to Moxie on reaching the 150 episode milestone of this amazing podcast, and here's to 150 more. Moxie reached out and asked if we would contribute a fact, and my fact is about the word slug. If you're anything like me, you probably assumed that the word slug and the word sluggish, when describing people of, let's say, lowered states and senses of urgency, comes from their slight resemblance in energy level to the shell-less snail, slippery, slimy, tube-like animal. But in fact, it's the opposite. Slugs are named after a particularly slow and lazy-moving variety of person. Both the words slug, noun, and sluggish, adjective, predate the naming in English of that little critter by a couple hundred years. The first time the word shows up to describe the animal in the Oxford English Dictionary is in 1703, while the first use of slug to describe a slow, lazy person goes all the way back to 1425. And sluggish comes along not long afterwards, showing up in print as early as 1450. So slugs are called slugs because they resemble slow-moving people, not the other way around.
The silent movie trope of the damsel tied to the train tracks never happened in any silent movie. It came from a play in which a man is tied to the tracks and saved by the female lead, leading him to gratefully declare, "And these are the women who ain't got the vote." Kudulun, a Mongolian noblewoman, declared she would only marry a man who could beat her at wrestling, but if she won, they had to give her 100 horses. By the time of her death at age 46, she had 10,000 horses. Bodies aren't the only preserved things found in Irish peat bogs. Archaeologists have also found butter. Lots and lots of butter. The cool, oxygen-free environment of the mud was a good place to store food in the days before refrigeration. The Castle Bravo explosion, a nuclear bomb test on Bikini Atoll, was 2.5 to 3 times larger than it was supposed to be. 15 megatons rather than the predicted 6, due to the unforeseen additional reactions of lithium-7.
Hey, this is Kate from Ignorance Was Bliss. Moxie, 150 episodes, congratulations! You are an absolute rock star, and I am delighted to know you. My facts this time are just a series of what I would consider lesser known mental disorders, because I feel like that's pretty on brand for me, in no particular order. So one thing that people may be relatively familiar with is something called pica, P-I-C-A. And what that is this urge. It's beyond an urge, it's a compulsion to consume objects or items or substances that aren't considered actually edible. Chalk, metals, very small rocks, things like that. Occasionally, it's found that people have a metabolic disorder that leads them to do so, but more often doing so creates a metabolic disorder. Often anemia or a zinc imbalance, things like that. We don't really know where it comes from, and it's most common in small children, in people with developmental delays, and also pregnant women.
As always, Kate has gone above and beyond for me and for us. Instead of one 20 to 30 second fact, she sent in over 14 minutes worth. You can hear the full list of lesser-known disorders over on patreon.com/yourbrainonfacts. It has been repeatedly tested and proven that wine experts can't tell cheap wine from expensive, French from American, or even red from white when blindfolded. So pop open that $3 Chuck or Aldi store brand wine and have one for me. In 1990, despite the objections of President George H.W. Bush, the release of 15 American prisoners in Iraq was secured by boxing legend Muhammad Ali after he met with Saddam Hussein. If you put a rope around the world, but then wanted to raise the whole thing up by 1 foot, you would only have to add about 3 feet to the rope to make that happen.
Hi Moxie, this is Diana from Happily Ever Aftermath. The movie Goodfellas is based off of the book Wise Guy by Nicholas Pileggi. When interviewing the subject, Henry Hill, for the book, all that research was used by Pileggi's wife, Nora Ephron. The result of that research is the movie My Blue Heaven with Steve Martin and Rick Moranis. Even though Goodfellas is more popular than My Blue Heaven did come out into the theaters 1 month earlier. Thanks for letting me share this fact, and congratulations on your 150th episode.
U.S. English only has about 20 individual swear words. Everything else you can think of is a combination of those words. But Imperial Roman Latin had 800 different swear words. In ancient China, emperors used eunuchs as servants, and only the imperial family had eunuchs. Some famous eunuchs even gained the emperor's trust and had power to control the court. Boys or men from poor families castrated themselves in hopes of getting a high-placed job in the palace. Legendary stuntman Evel Knievel adopted the professional name Evil when he was in jail alongside a man whose last name was Knaufel, who the guards called Awful Knaufel. He figured, if he's Awful Knaufel, I should be Evel Knievel. The fastest growing body tissue in the class Mammalia is antlers, which can grow up to 1 inch a day. Counterintuitively, antlers, which are similar to bone, are shed annually, but horns, which are made of keratin like hair and nails are permanent.
Hello, this is Brad from Doomsday, history's most dangerous podcast, and my fact is about the Erfurt latrine disaster of 1184. Nobles from across the Roman Empire were called to the Church of St. Peter in Germany to settle an argument. Instead, the floor collapsed beneath their weight, dropping them into a cellar latrine deep enough to drown in. 60 noblemen and politicians were killed by liquid excrement. When asked for comment, local peasants said it was a good start. So I guess what I'm saying is, congrats to Moxie on 150 episodes, and here's to 150 more.
Despite being only 0.06% of the world's population, the Kalenjin community of Kenya produces the athletes that hold 70% of the elite distance running races in the world. In the 23 Berlin Marathon, for example, Kenyan runners took 7 of the top 10 places across both genders. Emus are the only birds with calf muscles. Emus can't walk backwards, and no one knows why exactly, but it's that quality that landed them on the early Australian flag, along with the kangaroo, for the same reason. In a California high school in 1967, a history teacher's social experiment to illustrate how easily people could get caught up in a fascist movement grew from his class of 25 to over 200 students from different schools in 5 days.
This is Kate Shaw from Strange Animals Podcast, wishing Moxie a happy 150th episode. There's a cave in Argentina called Cueva de los Manos that's full of rock art, including a painting of what's been called the South American unicorn. It looks like a small deer with a single straight horn growing from its forehead, and at least one writer has suggested that it depicts an extinct animal called Trigodon. Trigodon looked a little like a rhino with a small horn on its forehead. But Trigodon went extinct around 4 million years ago, and locals have tried to explain to the Europeans who flocked to the cave to see the unicorn painting that the so-called unicorn is a depiction of a small local deer called the huemul. Always listen to the locals.
Your lips don't touch when you say the word touch, but they do when you say separate. You can stretch out a vowel, but you can't stretch out a consonant. There is no such thing as an average person. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the average woman is 37, 5'4", with a 6-year-old son and 9-year-old daughter, lives in a 3-bedroom house with $200,000 still on the mortgage. But they could not find a single person in the country that matched that description. Sahara, Gobi, and Namib all mean desert, so it's redundant to say desert in the name. That's called a tautological name, which often results from 2 languages being combined to name a place.
Hello there, this is Tammy Fisher with In the Doll World. Did you know that President Abraham Lincoln once pardoned a doll? Lincoln's youngest son, Tad, was gifted a Union soldier doll named Jack. Well, according to Tad, Jack was not a good soldier, so Tad often court-martialed, executed, and buried Jack. When Tad asked his dad to pardon Jack, Lincoln did. He did so in writing and on official White House stationery. If you like dolls, please check out our doll podcast at In the Doll World. Bye-bye.
There was a 2-day-long riot in Toronto in 1855 that started in a brothel when a clown knocked a fireman's hat off. If you want me to go into that long form on the show, hop on our social media, Facebook and Instagram.com/YourBrainOnFacts, Twitter @BrainOnFactsPod, or join us in the Facebook group or the subreddit, which you can reach through YourBrainOnFacts.com/social. The reason we think Inuit languages have many words for snow is because the word for snow appears in many compound words for different types or uses for snow. Pigeons that live near hair salons often only have 2 toes. It's not an evolutionary thing, sadly. Improperly disposed of hair gets wrapped around their toes and cuts off the circulation.
This is Tondi from the MyhandleisJonathanBlade podcast. Most art is the artist trying to share a piece of themselves with the world. But did you know that before Marvel Comics editor, writer, and penciler Mark Gruenwald's untimely death in 1996, he had expressed the desire to one day literally be a part of his art. He wanted his ashes to be in the printing of one of his books. In 1997, Marvel Comics allowed Gruenwald's wife, Catherine, to mix his ashes into the ink used for the first printing of his collected Squadron Supreme miniseries. In 2016, she created a stamp with Gruenwald's signature and would mix his ashes in real time to stamp fans' personal effects at conventions and comic book shop appearances. Now many thousands of fans have a piece of Mark Gruenwald. Thanks, Moxie.
Damn, that is a nice voice. It's a good thing he won't be competing directly with me for voiceover work. During their muscly rivalry, Arnold Schwarzenegger tricked Sylvester Stallone into starring in what Stallone would call the worst movie in the solar system, Stop or My Mom Will Shoot. By acting really excited for the project, but asking for entirely too much money, So the studio took it over to Stallone and told him he could steal the role out from under Schwarzenegger. In 2018, German researchers asked participants to turn off a robot, but in the second round, the robot was programmed to ask them not to turn it off. A third of the subjects took twice as long to turn it off, and about 1 in 8 couldn't bring themselves to turn it off at all. A day on Venus lasts longer than its year. That means that if you could walk on the surface of Venus at the same speed as its rotation, you could effectively make it be the same time forever.
I'm Joshua Self, host of the show Self Shoots from the Hip. Did you know that in 2013, Steph Curry set the record for the most threes in an NBA season at 272? In 2015, that record was broken by none other than Steph Curry himself at 286. In 2016, that record was broken again by, drum roll please, Steph Curry again at 402 threes. So here's to you, Moxie. Set records and then break them.
The country with the most wild camels is Australia, with an estimated 1.25 million. They actually export them to Arab countries for meat and racing. The greatest temperature change recorded within a 24-hour period occurred in Loma, Montana on January 15, 1972. The temperature went from negative 54 degrees Fahrenheit to 49 degrees Fahrenheit, a difference of 103 degrees. For listeners in the home counties, that's negative 48 degrees Celsius to 9 degrees. Most bottles of oil labeled truffle oil have never been anywhere near a truffle. Their fabulous funk comes from the addition of methyl mercaptan, a naturally occurring gas that smells of rotten eggs, cabbages, or swamp water.
Hey, I'm Jackie from Jackie Watches Stuff, a podcast chronicling my cinematic quest to finally watch the movies I probably should have already seen. And I finally watched The Shawshank Redemption and learned this really cool fact. Morgan Freeman's son, Alfonso Freeman, was also in the film. Not only is he one of the prisoners cheering the arrival of fresh fish at the beginning, but you'll also find him as Red's mugshot, which explains the uncanny resemblance.
In 2009, a pigeon named Winston raced Telkom, South Africa's largest ISP, to see who could deliver 4 gigs of data to a location 60 miles away the fastest. By the time Winston arrived with a 4 gigabyte flash drive, Telkom had only transmitted 4% of the data. The scientific name for the phenomenon known as food coma is postprandial somnolence. Postprandial meaning after a meal, and somnolence meaning drowsy. 10% of the pagers still active in the world today are used by the British National Health Service. They also, until recently, were the largest purchaser of fax machines in the world.
What's going on, guys? My name is Michael.
And I'm Derek.
And we are from the Nerd Lab podcast, where we talk Marvel and Star Wars and DC, and today we have 2 fun facts for you. Go ahead, Derek.
So my fun fact is that in a comic book, Flash decided to save an entire city full of people in North Korea from a nuclear bomb. He rescued 500,000 people in 0.0001 seconds. He transported all of them over 35 miles in that quick span of time. What's your fact, Michael?
My fact is that the popular Star Wars character Yoda was almost played by a monkey. According to the book The Making of Star Wars by J.W. Rinsler, George Lucas originally planned for Yoda to be played by an adorable monkey, wearing a mask and carrying a cane.
That would have been wild.
The original name of the Decatur, Georgia restaurant that would launch the Applebee's chain was T.J. Applebee's RX for Edibles and Elixirs. The term gaslighting, or telling someone that their perception or memory of events is wrong, comes from the play Gaslight, wherein a man messes with the gas lighting in the house but tells his wife she's imagining it when she comments. In the US and UK, cats are said to have 9 lives, but in Spain, Greece, Germany, and Brazil, they have 7, and in Turkey and other Arabic-speaking areas, they have 6.
Hello, this is Monica Reinagel, host of the Nutrition Diva podcast. part of the Quick and Dirty Tips Network. I bet you've heard that coffee, tea, and other caffeinated drinks are dehydrating. Well, in truth, although caffeine is a diuretic, coffee and tea contain so much water that you end up keeping much more than you lose. So, contrary to conventional wisdom, drinking coffee and tea can actually help keep you hydrated.
Nicknamed Ranavalona the Cruel, Queen Robido-Andrian Ampoin Amarina of Madagascar ordered the deaths of 2.5 million people, half the island nation's population, during her reign from 1828 to 1861. While sleeping in his train car in 1920, French President Paul Deschanel rolled out the window and fell out of the train. When he was found by a railway inspector and declared himself to be president, the inspector assumed he was mad or drunk, but put him to bed and called for a doctor. Samuel Morse didn't create Morse code. The bulk of the work was done by his colleague Alfred Vail. Also, it's not technically a code, it's a cipher. And while we're here, SOS isn't an acronym for Save Our Ship or Save Our Souls or anything else. It's simply a distinct and readily recognizable series of sounds.
Hey there, Brain on Facts fans. It's Craig from the Ready, Set, Roll podcast. If you have always wanted to roll a D20, there's no better place than at Gen Con. Gen Con is the largest tabletop convention in North America, created for like-minded gamers to get together and discuss what's new and happening in tabletop games. The founder, a man by the name of Gary Gygax, got his hands on one of these new games and said, hey, maybe I should make my own. If the name Gygax sounds familiar, then you've probably heard of a little-known game called Dungeons & Dragons. Dungeons & Dragons has grown into the most popular RPG of all time, and it seems like when it comes to tabletop gaming, for Mr. Gygax, he wasn't playing around.
The Rh or rhesus factor, whether your blood type is positive or negative, gets its name from rhesus monkeys, whose blood contains the same protein. Skid marks aren't actually laying rubber. The heat from the friction of tires suddenly moving or suddenly stopping loosens up the bitumen in the asphalt, which is the dark marks that we see. In 2002, former NASA intern Tad Roberts and 3 others stole $21 million worth of moon rocks, contaminating them and making them virtually useless to scientists. And that was before Roberts and his girlfriend had celebratory sex on top of them. They also destroyed 3 decades worth of handwritten research notes. Just to be thorough, I guess.
This is Colleen Thomas from Shame Pinata, a show about creating rites of passage for real-life transitions. A female human is born with all the eggs she will ever produce. This gives each of us a direct physical link to our maternal grandmothers, as the egg that became us formed in our mother's body while our mother's body was in our grandmother's womb.
The air bubbles around a completely submerged boat propeller are from the surrounding water boiling. Because low pressure equals low boiling points, the pressure on the water near the trailing edge of the propeller blade goes so low that the water vaporizes, forming a bubble of air. Did you hear on the news about the message, "Dare Mighty Things," coded into the colors of the parachute of the Perseverance rover? The Jet Propulsion Lab also hid a message on curiosity in the tread of its wheels. As the rover drove around, the tracks it left in the dirt said JPL in Morse code, or Vail's cipher, I guess.
Hello, this is Harris from the Sleep Whispers podcast. I'm going to share a fact that I pulled off of one of my Trivia Time episodes. Curiously, I have a lot of listeners who just love falling asleep to fun facts that are gently whispered. Anyway, here it is, in the non-whisper form. Mars Incorporated loves to tell us that Snickers satisfies, but the name of this popular candy bar also baffles. What does the word Snickers have to do with chocolate, caramel, nougat, and peanuts? Absolutely nothing. The candy bar was named after a horse owned by the Mars family.
Limousines, clementines, the disgusting color chartreuse, Des Moines, Iowa, cappuccino, and capuchin monkeys are all named after monks. During World War II, the British government bought the world's entire supply of black tea to ensure that they wouldn't run out. It was the government's second biggest wartime purchase by weight. Less than bullets, but more than artillery shells. And just stop and think about how little tea actually weighs. The first vertebrates born in space were quail, which hatched on the Mir space station in 1990. They did not do well in zero-G and had to be hand-fed as chicks. As adults, they had no interest in mating and even produced fewer sperm cells and laid fewer eggs. Sony has engineered a standard-size cassette tape that can hold 180 terabytes of data, enough for 47 million songs. That's about half as many songs as Spotify's entire offering. Imagine seeing that unspooled on the side of the road.
Hey, I'm Ricky French from the NocaNews Network here with Dan Colley.
Hi.
We usually talk about the news no one cares about, and maybe here's a fact that no one will care about.
Yeah, it's true.
Squirrels are behind most power outages in the United States. The American Public Power Association says that squirrels are the most frequent cause of power outages in the U.S. They've even developed a data tracker called the Squirrel Index that analyzes the patterns and timing of squirrels' impact on electrical power systems. Turns out the peak times of the year for squirrel attacks are from May to June and from October to November.
Typically, the squirrels cause problems by tunneling, chewing through electrical insulation, or becoming a current path between electrical conductors. Frankly, the number one threat experienced to date by the U.S. electrical grid is squirrels, said John C. Inglis, the former deputy director of the National Security Agency in 2015.
The most isolated vertebrate population is the devil's hole pupfish. Their entire species of about 135 individuals live in a single part of a single cave in what is called the Devil's Hole in, of all places, Death Valley. You can visit if you like, but good luck getting past the security cameras and over the barbed wire fence to say hi to the fish. The very first car theft was perpetrated by a woman, Bertha Benz, wife of Carl Benz of Mercedes-Benz fame, who knew that the car could be a real hit if people actually saw it. So she drove it 50 miles or 88 kilometers from Mannheim to Pforzheim at a whopping 9 miles or 14 kilometers per hour. She also effectively invented brake pads on that trip by asking a cobbler to add a leather pad to the brakes to make them quieter. The Chinese equivalent of the Department of Defense doesn't control the country's army. The Communist Party does.
Hi, Moxie. Thanks for having us, and congratulations on 150 episodes of Your Brain on Facts.
You know, Hallie, one of my favorite facts that we've learned on our podcast, Quiz and Hers, is that every year the town of Consono, Italy, plays host to the Nascondino World Championship, which is a world championship of hide and seek. And the winning team is awarded the prestigious Golden Fig Leaf.
Wow, that is a weird fact.
It is.
For facts like this and other facts about things like movies, sports, and history,
Quiz and Hers, the trivia podcast where we test each other's knowledge and the strength of our relationship. Moxie, back to you.
In Sanka, British Columbia, there is a castle-like house made of the most unusual building material. Embedded in the cement walls are about 500,000 square glass bottles that originally held embalming fluid. It was built in 1953 by a retiring funeral director. I am Jack's total lack of surprise. There are more ways to order a deck of cards than there are atoms estimated to be on Earth. The standard 52-card deck has 8 times 10 to the 67th power possible arrangements of cards. The first color TV broadcast in Australia in 1975 started in the middle of a show called Auntie Jack and was worked into the plot. You can actually look it up on YouTube and watch the color monster take over the screen.
Hi, I'm Naomi Watkins.
And I'm Mike Aguilar.
And we're the hosts of This Is Her Place, the podcast that tells the remarkable stories of Utah women past
and present.
Congratulations, Moxie and your Brain on Facts on your 150th episode.
Woohoo! Did you know that John Lennon originally suggested Adolf Hitler, among many others, to appear on the famous cover art for the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album?
One of the artists, Jan Haworth, has created a stencil graffiti mural that resembles the original cover, but with more representation of women, people of color, and artists.
The mural, called SLC Pepper, is in Salt Lake City, Utah.
And just last year, Jan Haworth unveiled a new mural featuring all Utah women that's 5 stories tall to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment and the 150th anniversary of women gaining the right to vote in Utah.
This should go over well for anyone who was a big fan of the first chapter of the Your Brain on Facts book, What's in a Scientific Name. Scientists also have nicknames for individual genes. The gene that can cause fetal hearts to fail to develop is called the Tin Man gene. The Spock gene gives you pointed ears, and the gene that causes hypersensitivity to alcohol is called the Cheap Date gene. Neutron stars, the result of the explosive death of other stars, are so dense that a piece of one the size of a sugar cube would weigh 100 million tons. Second Lieutenant Owen J. Baggett is credited as the only pilot to have shot down a plane with a handgun when he managed to shoot a Japanese pilot in the head after he had parachuted out of his own damaged B-24.
Hi, this is Dr. Jade Wu, host of the Quick and Dirty Tips podcast, Savvy Psychologist. Often people think that good quality sleep should mostly be deep sleep. But in fact, if you're a healthy sleeper, only about 15% of your night is supposed to be deep sleep. Sweet dreams.
Remember how I said in episode 100, and any conversation I can shoehorn it into, that the longest place name in any English-speaking country was the Welsh village of Go? Well, this time we're giving an honorable mention to a hill in New Zealand called, and bear in mind this is a single word, Taumata Waka Tongi Hanga Koa Ua Oa Tamatia Pokiai Wanuaki Tanataahu. My sincere apologies to the nation of New Zealand in general and the Maori people in particular. I tried. More people live in the 75,000 square miles of Bangladesh than live in the 6.6 million square miles of Russia, 163 million versus 144 million people. There was an answer to Lewis Carroll's question, why is a raven like a writing desk? Because it can produce a few notes, though they are very flat, and it is never put with the wrong end first. But never was spelled Nevar or raven backwards. But somewhere along the line, a well-meaning editor corrected it.
Moxie, congratulations on 150 episodes. That's an incredible milestone. This is Steve Silverman of the Useless Information Podcast, and I have jokingly called my wife a Lucy Stoner, which is a real term, although it's hardly used today. And that's because when Lucy Stone married Henry Blackwell in 1855, she did something that no woman in United States history had ever done before. She kept her maiden name, and she even had a fight in court for the right to do so. And that's something that many women, including my wife, do today, making them all Lucy Stoners.
Successful businessman, author, college founder, and philanthropist Roger Babson devoted a great deal of time and money into fighting the scourge of our enemy number one, gravity. He blamed gravity for the drowning death of his sister. Guess the water had a better lawyer. The children's book Ferdinand the Bull, about a bull who would rather smell flowers than fight matadors, was banned in Germany and Spain during World War II as subversive propaganda. A tooth can reattach to its roots after being knocked out if it's put back in place in time. That's why it's important to keep the tooth clean and moist and get to the dentist post-haste.
Hello, this is Elizabeth from Ballsy History. 150 episodes. That's incredible. Those are a lot of facts. And by facts, I mean your brain on facts, and I've got one for you. At the beginning of the 19th century, trading Chinese goods, such as tea, silks, and porcelain, was extremely lucrative for Britain. However, they would not buy British products in return, and only wanted to sell their goods in exchange for silver. In order to stop this, the East India Company and others began to smuggle Indian opium into China illegally, and they demanded payment in silver, which moved the balance back to the way Britain wanted it. The silver in turn was then used to buy tea or other goods. By 1839, opium sales to China covered the entire tea trade. When the First Opium War began, it was in large part thanks to tea.
The best-selling car of all time is the Little Tikes Cozy Coupe. The highest volume tire manufacturer in the world is Lego, and the biggest toy distributor in the world is McDonald's. Clouds may look light and fluffy, but the average cumulus cloud can weigh 1.1 million pounds or 500,000 kilos. The CIA headquarters has its own Starbucks, but baristas don't write names on the cups or yell them out loud. The receipts say store number 1 rather than Starbucks, and baristas need an escort to leave their workstation. As a lifelong retail worker, hard pass. Percy Spencer was working for American Appliance Company, now Raytheon, when he accidentally invented the microwave oven. The company was the one that filed the patent for it. They gave Spencer a $2 bonus and no royalties.
Hello, my name is Paul, and I'm one of the hosts of the Varmints podcast, which is all about animals. We talk about anything that creeps, crawls, slithers, flies, jumps, hops, or swim on this planet. Did you know that cuttlefish learn even before they are born? Cuttlefish eggs start out covered in this blackish-brown ink that cuttlefish produce, but over time the ink washes away and the egg becomes transparent. By this time, the developing cuttlefish's eyes are fully formed, and we now know that a cuttlefish's adult behavior starts being shaped while they are still an embryo. Researchers suspended eggs laid by a captive female cuttlefish in a shallow tank. The eggs sat in the middle of 2 compartments with glass sides and opaque plastic floors. The control group had empty compartments, and the test subjects had compartments that contained crabs. As the 2 sets of eggs hatched, they sank to the bottom of the tank, and their views were obscured by those opaque plastic floors. The hatchlings were collected, starved for a week, and then given a choice of either crab or shrimp. Now, cuttlefish love sand shrimp. They're what a dog trainer would call a high-value reward. 71% of the test subjects chose the crab over the sand shrimp, while only 10% of the cuttlefish from the control group picked the crabs over the sand shrimp. Now, the fetuses from other species, including humans, can learn from chemical cues that they detect while they're in the womb. But the cuttlefish were clearly learning from sight alone. Any chemical cues given off by the crabs were completely encased in plastic. So this is the first instance of embryonic visual learning in any animal that we know of. Young cuttlefish are completely on their own with no help from adult cuttlefish when they're born, so the ability to see what's on the local menu before they even hatch is a pretty handy thing to have. You can find the Varmints podcast wherever fine podcasts are sold. My name's Paul, and thanks for listening.
A Belgian bar had such a problem with people stealing their signature glasses, they started making customers hand over one of their shoes as collateral. The baskets of shoes quickly became a photo op for locals and tourists alike. In 1909, Vancouver debuted their first ambulance, which picked up its first patient during their test drive around town. They, coincidentally, had also run him over. 6,000 world languages can be traced back to a single mother tongue spoken in Africa 70,000 years ago. In 2008, an app was released called I Am Rich. Described as a work of art with no hidden function at all, it displayed the message, I am rich. I deserve it. It cost $999.99, the largest price Apple would allow you to put on an app. And 8 people bought it before Apple took it down.
Happy 150th, Moxie. The podcast still looks so young. I'm Barry from Worst Foot Forward. If you think having a birthday on February 29th would be rubbish, I've got a worse option. In 1700, Sweden decided to switch from the Julian to the Gregorian calendar, but instead of simply jumping forward 11 days like many other countries, the Swedes opted to gradually catch up over the course of 40 years by omitting the leap days. They did this in 1700, but basically forgot in both 1704 and 1708. In 1712, they gave up and went back to the Julian calendar by adding an extra day, February 30th. They eventually made the change all in one go in 1753, when all those people born on February 30th, 1712 were still waiting for their first birthday party.
There is only one letter that doesn't appear in the name of any U.S. states. Can you guess it before I say it? There's a Z in Arizona, there's a J in New Jersey, one of my least favorite letters when we play bananagrams, and there are even 2 X's, New Mexico and Texas. But nowhere will you find a single Q. Carrie Fisher agreed to be in the infamous and objectively bad Star Wars Holiday Special if she would be allowed to sing, because she wanted to do more theater and musicals in her career. Mark Hamill agreed to be in it only if his contract specified he would not have to sing. While Agent Orange was the best known and most heavily used defoliant of the Vietnam War, there was a whole horrible rainbow of herbicides, including pink, green, purple, blue, and white. Agent Blue specifically targeted cropland, because we're awful.
Hi, this is Kevin from the Jury Room Podcast. Depression-era gangster John Dillinger survived a shootout with the FBI, escaped from jail with a wooden gun, robbed police stations, had plastic surgery to change his face and remove his fingerprints, and led the government on a year-long chase that cost him 4 times the amount he had ever stolen.
The first actor to voice the character Porky Pig, Joe Dougherty, stuttered just like the character does. Ironically and unfortunately, though, he was fired from the role because his stuttering was severe enough to cause delays in recording. Samsung tests phone durability with a butt-shaped robot, complete with jeans, to sit on the phones and make sure they can take the weight. Famous presenter Richard Attenborough always wears a blue shirt when filming nature documentaries, because filming dates can spread out over months and he wants to maintain continuity, because he's a pro. The longest confirmed kill sniper shot was performed by a Canadian Special Forces sniper who took out an Islamic State militant from 2.19 miles or 3.54 kilometers away.
Hello, my name's Daniel Midgley from the Because Language podcast, and I'm here to tell you my favorite, currently, fact about language, specifically the English language, but this also applies to others. The R sound, jumps. That's right. In English, you can find lots of cases where the sound of R jumps around. For example, in Old English, a bird was a brid. The R jumped. A horse was a hross. And have you ever wondered if it's 8 and 18, 7 and 17? Why is it not 3 and 13? Answer, it used to be, but the R jumped. 13 or 13 became 13. But now for some modern examples. If you say comfortable, RT, comfort, lots of people say that as comfortable, TR, where the sound has flipped. Some people say modern like modern. And my total favorite example, because this one blew my mind, hope it blows yours. What's the name of the cheese that begins with M and ends in pony? Mascarpone, right? Everybody says it mascarpone, but if you go and look at the label, it is not spelled mascarpone, it is spelled mascarpone. The R jumped way over to the first syllable. Amazing. So this has a name, it is called metathesis, and R metathesis is just a fascinating feature of English. That is my fun fact about language. Moxie, congratulations on getting to episode 150. Keep on going, hope you can do a lot more. Thanks.
Well, it's true, the line, "Elementary, my dear Watson," was never written in any Sherlock Holmes novel. It was said in the 1939 Basil Rathbone film, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. Isn't that a fun name to say? Basil Rathbone. Firefighters use wetting agents to make water more wet. The chemicals reduce the surface tension of regular water, so it's easier to spread and soak into objects. That's why it's known as wet water. A cattle rancher in New Jersey is credited for inventing glitter in 1934. Henry Rushman crushed up some plastic while trying to find a way to dispose of it, and accidentally made glitter. Green hats are a serious fashion don't for men in China. It signifies that your wife has cheated on you, since the words for cuckold sound similar to the word for green. This dates all the way back to the 13th century in the Yuan dynasty, when families of prostitutes were forced to wear green hats.
We're Garrett and Sabrina from the I Know Dino podcast.
Fun fact, we're in the golden age of dinosaur discovery, and a new dinosaur is named almost every week.
Like Zool, the armored dinosaur with a massive club tail, which is nicknamed the Destroyer of Shins.
Churches in Malta often have 2 clocks set to different times. The one with the correct time is for parishioners, and the wrong clock is meant to trick the devil so he can't interrupt Mass. Mercedes invented a joystick-controlled car in 1966. The F200 concept car used the joystick in place of both the steering wheel and the pedals. The car could also sense which side the driver was sitting on, so it could theoretically be both a left or right-hand drive car. The language spoken by Pingu, the claymation penguin beloved by children around the world, though much less known in the US, isn't just gibberish. It is a nonsense language called Gramalot, used by clowns and in satire for centuries. In July of 2013, 800,000 volunteers in India planted an estimated 50 million trees in a single day. Ethiopians topped that in 2019 with a staggering 350 million trees in 12 hours. The most trees planted by any individual person was 15,170 by a Canadian man in 2001. When the MTS Oceanus cruise ship began flooding in 1991, the captain and crew abandoned ship without sounding the alarm. One of the entertainers on board, a man named Moss Hill, used the ship's radio to call for rescue. The crew were later brought up on charges. Hey, this is Moxie from slightly less far in the past than the Moxie you've been listening to. It was bound to happen, statistically speaking, and it stands to reason I wouldn't find it until the final edit, but 2 generous podcasters did send in similar facts. But it was so good of them to give up their time and put energy into this that of course I'm going to include them both.
I'm Dr. B, host of the Curious Professor podcast. Did you know that squirrels are one of the most frequent causes of power outages in the USA? That's according to the American Public Power Association, which uses the Squirrel Index to track squirrel activity and its impact on the power system. According to the Brookings Institution, squirrels have caused more disruptions to our power grid than hackers, terrorists, and enemy nations combined. Isn't that nuts?
Despite physical length, there are more bones in the neck of a sloth than the neck of a giraffe. Like most mammals, giraffes have 7 vertebrae, but sloths have 10. Before American painter John G. Rand invented metal paint tubes with screw caps in the 19th century, paints were often stored in pig bladders tied up with string. Neil deGrasse Tyson bought his first telescope at age 14 with money he earned as a dog walker, charging 50 cents a pop. Egyptian pharaoh Ramses IV had his eyes replaced with tiny onions when he was mummified. The rings and layers of onions symbolized eternal life to ancient Egypt.
Hey Moxie, happy 150. I'm Sean from Ink and Ash, a short story podcast. And just as a little peek behind the curtain, Moxie was my first friend in podcasting. She got in touch with me when both of our shows were young, and we've collaborated many times since. And you listeners should know she is just as lovely behind the scenes as she is on her show. Anyway, on my show I narrate short stories and talk about authors, and authors are an interesting lot to be sure. Here are a few facts about Charles Dickens, for example. Dickens was involved in a bad railway accident in 1865 in which he tended to some of the injured, but 10 people perished. A year later he published The Signal Man, in which an apparition repeatedly warns a railway signalman of future accidents, including the man's own death. Dickens was also fascinated by hypnosis, pardon the turn of phrase, and he gave himself several unusual nicknames, such as the Sparkler of Albion, the Inimitable, the Revolver, and Resurrectionist. Finally, Dickens had a pet raven named Grip, a bird that he loved so much he had it stuffed and mounted in his study after it died. Well, thanks for having me on, Moxie, and here's to another 150 episodes.
When 9th century Persian polymath, physician, alchemist, and philosopher Abu Bakr Muhammad Zakaria Razi was tasked with choosing the location of a new hospital, he hung up pieces of meat in different places around Baghdad and ordered the hospital built in the place where the meat rotted the most slowly. In the Norse mythology that J.R.R. Tolkien ripped off, borrowed heavily from, there is no mention of dwarves being short, as we see them depicted in all fantasy stories and games for the last 65 years. They are miners by trade, but instead of being ginger, are pitch black in color. Ashkenazi Jews of Europe can trace their lineage back to a group of about 350 people who lived 700 years ago. Among his many eccentricities, Nikola Tesla couldn't stand to be in the presence of pearls. When his secretary showed up for work one day with a pearl necklace on, he made her go home. And we'll finish this up back where we started. The Guinness Book of World Records holds the world record for the best-selling copyrighted book of all time, having sold more than 130 million copies at last count, and is also the book most commonly stolen from libraries. And that's where I run out of ideas, at least for today. But what this episode has showed us, I think, is there are never enough ideas, never enough facts, never enough knowledge. I have learned so much doing 150 of these. I have forgotten most of it, but it's in the computer when I need it. And that's reassuring. For those who don't know me well, I was struck by lightning a decade ago. Some of the files up there are a little 404. But thank you so much for being with me for this first 150 episodes. I hope that we will be together for at least another 150. Thanks to all of the amazing hosts and shows who contributed to this colossal effort. You can find them on the website, and they will be tagged and linked on social media throughout the week. Thanks for spending part of your day with me, and stay safe.